Welcome. Welcome to the ship recycling session of the Sea Trade Middle East Maritime Conference. We have today a distinguished panel that includes representatives from three of the world's leading cash buyers for scrap, perhaps the world's leading cash buyers for scrap. And each of our speakers have a different role within their respective organizations. We have Mr. Dave, who is the Chief Financial Officer of Wirana, Mr. Dean, who is the General Manager of DTA, and like myself, an English lawyer, so don't get put off by that. And Mr. Hadzianis, who is involved in the green ship recycling at GMS. We have Mr. Prasad, who is the Managing Director of Bernard Schulte in India, and Mr. Bhatia, who of Nasco Karaoglan, who has had a long involvement in the ship recycling industry and with insurance in the sector. Now, ideally, I would have liked to have a representative from the IMO and perhaps from one of the recyclers themselves, but I believe that this panel can more than explain current developments in the industry, look to its future, and generate debate. And I thought I would begin the session with a quote from the World Bank report on the industry in Bangladesh and Pakistan that was published in 2010 and perhaps deserves a wider circulation than I think it has had. And a quote from the executive summary of that report. Ship recycling offers the most environmentally sustainable way of disposing of old vessels, with virtually every part of the hull and machine complex being reused or recycled as scrap metal. Although the industry is beneficial from a life cycle assessment point of view, over the years it has gravitated towards countries with low labor costs, weak regulations on occupational safety, and limited environmental enforcement. The global shift in the industry to countries with comparatively weaker regulatory systems is of particular concern, as ships contain many hazards that can have significant detrimental effects on humans and the environment if not dealt with properly. So I think what we see is that this is an industry which is inherently green. Almost everything on the ship and the ship itself is recycled and reused. The problem is that the process of recycling leads to environmental and health and safety issues. Now, recognizing this and the difficulty in applying the Basel Convention on transboundary movements of hazardous wastes to ship recycling, in 2009, the Hong Kong Convention was adopted and set out a control system that imposed obligations, or seeks to impose obligations for flag states, for owners, for recycling states, and for recycling facilities. There's a question mark over over when it will come into force, and on developing implementation programs, and on its effect on the industry. Earlier this year, having in mind the anticipated boom in scrapping vessels due to the phasing out of single-hull tankers by 2015, the European Union Commission proposed implementing for EU-flagged ships the convention by way of an EU regulation without waiting for its ratification and requiring, for instance, that EU-flagged ships only be allowed to be recycled in facilities that meet the Hong Kong Convention requirements. So the industry has both market and regulatory challenges to meet, and I hope we will hear today how it works and how those working in it view its future and the meeting of those challenges. So with that introduction to my first speaker, this is Mr. Dave from Wirana. As I've said, he's the Chief Financial Officer. He's, of course, very experienced in the ship recycling business. He handles banking and finance and SMP of demo vessels. Wirana themselves are a leading and prominent cash buyer. Now, originally from Mumbai, he's a chartered accountant, and he has seen the company growing rapidly to the stage where they average in excess of 100 vessels annually, and in the past 3 years have sold in excess of 150 vessels a year. They're also apparently well known for having purchased 2 of the largest vessels for recycling. So without further ado, Mr. Dave.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Keyur Dave from Virana Shipping Corporation. Thanks for the introduction. And I've been asked to talk on ship recycling and Basel Convention. But of course, Basel Convention itself will not suffice. We'll talk also about the Hong Kong Convention. But before that, a brief introduction about our company. Virana was formed in 1983, and it's going to complete about 30 years next year. And we sell to all ship recycling markets, including the 4 major: India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, China. And as Alex mentioned, we do about 150 vessels a year. We are also proponents of green recycling and try to increase awareness about the importance of green recycling by helping our buyers and also talking at such conferences. Now, this is a question that is always there at every conference. Probably it is repeated by all the speakers, I suppose. At least more than one speaker talks about it at a recycling event. And who is a cash buyer? The main reason being that cash buyers are most of the times misunderstood as brokers. When you tell somebody, I'm a cash buyer, they say, oh, so you're a broker. You're a middleman. As soon as the word middleman comes in, you become a broker. But that's not true. Cash buyers take risk by buying and selling. So we are essentially trading in the vessels, and we take title to the ship. So that's who we are. And why the song and dance about recycling? In the past few years, from 2009 onwards, I suppose, there's a lot of volume increase from 300 ships on an average that used to be recycled. Now we are recycling close to 1,200 ships. The annual turnover of the industry has increased from about $1 billion to $6.5 billion. So it's become very important. Previously, it was just a pain that the owners wanted to just get rid of. But now, with the prices of steel in excess of $400 a ton of lightweight, the industry has come into focus. And because of that, we can also see the recycling forecasts for next year. This year has been a record year. And again, next year we will have a very large volume of ships coming in for recycling. These are just figures for next year. We also talk about hard and harsh realities of today. Deflating international steel prices. Although in historical terms, we may feel it was $100, $200 of lightweight, but from the peak, it has come down quite a bit. And currency devaluations and fluctuations also affect a lot in the ship recycling industry, because that affects the purchasing power. And again, like I was talking to Nick, we have a lot of problems with the end buyers. So there are a lot of difficulties in the ship recycling industries going on today. And now we come to the real topic, which is the green recycling. Can environmentally safe recycling be carried out through beaching? Because that is always a debate in green recycling. beaching and non-beaching, like I had mentioned in my last talk at the previous conference, it is something that it's an unending debate. And Basel Convention is a convention that talks about transboundary movement of waste in general, but it's not specific to ship recycling. So is it effective? Although the EU regulators want all the OECD owners to go to OECD countries only for recycling, but that's not happening. And they are getting to terms with the reality that they'll have to think of something else and coming out with new regulations. China is by far, among the recycling nations, by far the most green, and because of that, the sellers are paying a premium and accepting lower prices for their vessels to get the vessels recycled in a green way. But there's a lot of education happening, and sellers are being advised and made aware that recycling can be done in a green way, even using the beaching method. And what is more important is that the hazardous materials that are used should be disposed of in an environmentally friendly way. That is more important rather than what method is being used. DSIC is a new recycling facility in China, which has a very large capacity. In fact, China has a lot of capacity which is not being utilized because of the prices that they are not able to pay. Technological developments in recycling at Alang in India are also something that should be taken notice of, because like we mentioned, the recycling is being done in countries where the labor is cheap and regulation is not so effective. But then over the period, especially after the 2007 judgment of the Supreme Court, a lot of improvements have taken place, some of which have been mentioned here. The crane capacities have been increased, the worker safety has been looked at. So, like I mentioned, the 2007 case has been instrumental, and there are a lot of government bodies in India that are overseeing this recycling, like the Maritime Board, Pollution Control Board, and Customs, and various authorities look at that. So now, when we talk of the Basel Convention, it's, as I said, not specific to ships. And in fact, Basel considers the ship for recycling itself as a waste. Whereas, as you can see, the topic of today is turning aged assets into cash. And about 95% of the vessel can really be recycled and reused. So there's absolutely no need really to think of it as a waste. So, and Basel requires a flag state of the exporting countries to certify that the ships do not contain hazardous material. This is a basic challenge that owners are circumventing by just changing flags. And as a result, the EU regulators have noticed that 90% or more of the EU ships are being recycled in the Indian subcontinent, where it's a non-OECD country. But everybody wants the top dollar. So, and Basel does not recognize the beaching method. That is also one thing that compels the owners to change flags. Now, why IMO Convention and not Basel? The IMO Hong Kong Convention in 2009 was adopted to specify safe and environmentally sound recycling of ships. And it is aimed at ensuring that ships being recycled when they reach their end of operational lives do not pose unnecessary risks. And recognizing the beaching method as an acceptable method for environmentally sound recycling. And in fact, the Blue Lady decision that the Indian Supreme Court gave in 2007 mirrors the requirement of the IMO Convention, which basically says that beaching or no beaching, what you really need to do is identify where are the hazardous materials on the ship. You know, you have to identify where they are, take them out properly, and dispose them properly so that they don't cause environmental hazard, and also looking after worker safety. So upon entry into force, this Hong Kong Convention ships to be sent for recycling will be required to carry an inventory of hazardous materials. Every ship will have to do that, and it should be specific to each ship. An appendix to the convention provides a list of hazardous materials, the installation or use of which is prohibited or restricted in shipyards, ship repair yards, and ships of parties to the convention. Ships will be required to have an initial survey to verify the inventory of hazardous materials, additional surveys during the life of the ship, and a final survey prior to recycling. And every recycling of the ship will have to have a ship recycling plan as to how exactly the ship is going to be recycled, what are the steps that are going to be taken, and what is going to be done with the hazardous materials, how are they going to be disposed of in an environmentally friendly way. And there are some guidelines that have been developed and adopted to assist the states in the early implementation of this convention's technical standards. Guidelines for development of hazardous materials, guidelines for development of recycling plan, guidelines for environmentally sound recycling, and guidelines for authorization of ship recycling facilities. Ship recycling facilities will also need to be certified after the Hong Kong Convention comes into force. Now, the convention is open for accession by any state. It will enter into force 24 months after the date on which 15 states representing 40% of world merchant shipping by gross tonnage have either signed it without reservation as to ratification, acceptance, or approval. What basically this would mean is that the major recycling nations have to ratify it before this can really become effective. Now, we understand that the IMO Convention is, as far as India is concerned, before the Parliament for adoption and ratification. And we are given to understand on a good faith basis that it could be adopted probably by early next year, which is the opening of the summer session of the Indian Parliament. Now, there is a little confusion about what the Indian Supreme Court has said about Basel Convention in the Oriental Nicety case in August 2012. The Supreme Court held that the Basel Convention was the paramount legislation, and in the absence of any other legislation for the moment, and that's important, for the moment, and that the principles of Basel Convention were applicable for the import. So, you know, that gave the impression to the world that, now India will have to stop scrapping ships or recycling ships. But then the government of Gujarat and government of India sought clarification from the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has clarified that its order of 2007 passed in the Blue Lady case was all-encompassing, and if those principles and directions were followed, the import of vessels could continue as normal and without any restrictions, without any additional restrictions, apart from what have been specified in that order. So, Supreme Court has already appointed several agencies in 2007 that overlook the arrival and subsequent beaching process and the recycling. Gujarat Maritime Board, which is functioning under the aegis of the government of Gujarat, is responsible for the day-to-day affairs. So this is basically giving you an update of what is happening with the Basel Convention and the Hong Kong Convention. Countries other than India, China, as I said, is quite ahead in the green recycling movement, but the other two countries, Bangladesh and Pakistan, are in the process of getting their act together, and the government, especially in Bangladesh, is pushing them a little more to move towards green recycling. Thank you very much for your attention.